Have you ever been deeply wounded by someone, only to watch them move on like nothing ever happened? As if your pain was invisible, as if the harm they caused simply didn't exist. In today's video, we're going to explore the unsettling, psychological truth behind this kind of behavior. By the end, you'll fully understand why some people can cause intense emotional pain and feel absolutely no need to apologize. Carl Jung once said something that will permanently shift how you understand human relationships. He revealed that the people who hurt us most are often at war with hidden parts of themselves, parts they refuse to face. But here's what's truly shocking. Their inability to apologize isn't really about you at all. According to Jung, every person carries what he called the shadow, the dark, rejected parts of our personality we try to hide from others and from ourselves. This shadow contains everything we've been taught to see as unacceptable: our selfishness, our anger, our capacity to do harm. But here's where it gets disturbing. When someone hurts you and then acts like nothing happened, Jung would say they're not just avoiding accountability, they're protecting their psychological survival. Their refusal to say sorry is actually a desperate attempt to keep their shadow locked away in the dark, where they believe it must stay. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When someone hurts you and feels no remorse, they're unknowingly projecting their own hidden darkness onto you. Your presence triggers a part of them they cannot bear to confront. Think about the last person who wounded you and never apologized. As we go deeper, you'll see exactly which defense mechanisms they were using and how their actions reveal more about their inner world than about your worth. Jung identified projection as one of the most powerful and damaging defense mechanisms. When a person projects, they unconsciously take the parts of themselves they can't accept and assign them to someone else. In short, they make their inner darkness your external burden. People who hurt others without ever making amends are often stuck in a cycle of projection. They can't admit to their own cruelty or harmful impulses because doing so would shatter the idealized image they have of themselves. So instead, they paint you as the problem, the one who provoked it, the one who deserved it. And here's the truly unsettling part. The person who hurt you may honestly believe they did nothing wrong. Their defense mechanisms are so powerful that they've literally rewritten reality in their mind. Jung warned that this kind of self-deception runs so deep, it becomes their truth. In Jung's study of projection, he found that the more someone denies their shadow, the more intensely they project it onto others. So the people who hurt you the worst are often the ones most disconnected from their own capacity for harm. They've split their identity so completely that they see themselves as only good and you as the source of all negativity. But it gets even darker. Jung discovered that projection isn't random. People tend to target those who embody traits they unconsciously associate with their own repressed shadow. In other words, you may have been hurt because you reflected something in them they despise in themselves. Jung also introduced the idea of the persona, a carefully crafted mask we show to the world. It's who we want others to believe we are: kind, moral, successful, lovable. But Jung uncovered something terrifying about this mask. The more perfect it looks, the more dangerous the person behind it can become. Those obsessed with protecting their flawless persona will go to extreme lengths to keep it intact, even if it means harming others while keeping their reputation clean. They can't apologize, because doing so would fracture the illusion of perfection and expose the shadow they've buried. Ever notice how the people who hurt you most are often the ones who constantly promote their values, kindness, or integrity? Jung would say, that's not a coincidence, it's a warning. The more someone clings to a perfect image, the more destructive their unconscious behavior tends to become. These individuals won't acknowledge their harmful actions, so their pain leaks out in covert ways: passive aggression, emotional manipulation, sudden cruelty, all while they maintain a story that they're the good one. They'll exploit your vulnerabilities and say they were just being honest. They'll withdraw support at your lowest moments and claim they were setting boundaries. And all the while, they still see themselves as kind. Jung believed the highest goal of psychological growth is something he called individuation, the integration of all parts of the self, including the shadow, into a whole and authentic identity. But most people never achieve this. They remain fragmented, split between their idealized self-image and the darkness they refuse to own. According to Jung, people who hurt others without remorse are stuck in what he described as psychological inflation. They've merged with their positive self-image so completely that they cannot even perceive their capacity for harm. Their cruelty doesn't register in their awareness because it exists outside their version of reality. And here's something that will forever change how you view relationships. Jung found that emotionally immature people can't offer real apologies because they can't see themselves clearly. Their growth stopped at the point where protecting their image became more important than facing the truth. Jung taught that a genuine apology requires what he called shadow integration, the courage to face and accept your own darkness. But many people would rather live in denial than admit they're capable of causing deep harm. So they create a fantasy where their actions were either justified, not that serious, or never happened at all. That's why certain relationships leave you feeling like you're losing your mind. You're not just dealing with a person, you're dealing with a split in reality. They see themselves as the good one, and you as the flawed one. Jung warned that this kind of psychological split can lead to what he called participation mystique, a state where two people become unconsciously entangled in each other's projections. And finally, Jung discovered one of the strangest truths in psychology. People who seem the most confident, superior, and self-assured are often hiding intense feelings of shame and worthlessness. He called this the compensation mechanism. When someone buries deep feelings of inadequacy, their mind creates the opposite, a sense of superiority, entitlement, and emotional detachment. These people hurt others not out of strength, but out of psychological weakness they're terrified to face. Have you ever been hurt by someone who seemed to enjoy it? Someone who looked down on you while you were in pain? Jung would say they weren't showing power, they were exposing their most painful wound. Their cruelty wasn't strength. It was a desperate attempt to outrun the shame they couldn't admit they carried. When someone hurts you and feels no remorse, it's often because they're clinging to a false sense of power. Deep down, they feel utterly powerless. Jung discovered that people with strong compensation mechanisms simply cannot apologize. Doing so would collapse the inflated self-image they depend on, and force them to confront deeply buried feelings of inadequacy. Their cruelty serves a psychological purpose. It gives them a fleeting sense of superiority, which helps numb their own pain. But here's the tragic irony. Jung found that the more someone needs to feel above others, the more inferior they actually feel inside. Their refusal to apologize isn't a sign of strength. It's emotional armor protecting a wounded inner child who never learned how to sit with vulnerability. According to Carl Jung, we don't encounter harmful people by chance, we unconsciously attract them. Our psyche draws us toward people who will trigger our deepest wounds because, unconsciously, we're trying to heal those wounds through relationships. Jung once said, "Everything that we see in others is a projection of ourselves." That means the people who hurt you most often reflect parts of your own psyche that are still calling out for healing. But here's the disturbing part. While you're trying to grow and evolve, they may have no awareness of this dynamic at all. This is why you may find yourself in the same painful relationship pattern over and over. Jung discovered that we're drawn to people who recreate our earliest emotional wounds. Why? Because some part of us believes that if we can finally get this person to love us properly, we'll heal our original trauma. Jung found that those who refuse to apologize often serve as shadow carriers in our lives. They embody the very traits we most need to understand about love, about power, and about human nature. And while we're learning these painful but transformative lessons, they remain unconscious players in the drama. Here's what Jung taught about breaking free. You can't heal someone who won't see their own shadow. You can't make someone take responsibility when they can't even acknowledge they've done harm. Your growth lies not in fixing them, but in understanding why your own psyche was drawn to them in the first place. Jung didn't just look at individuals, he also studied entire cultures. He found that whole societies can develop a collective shadow that enables harm. We live in a world that often values image over authenticity, success over integrity, and self-promotion over self-reflection. That collective shadow creates a system where people can hurt others and still face no consequences. In societies like ours, Jung discovered that some forms of harm are normalized, while the desire for accountability is dismissed or even mocked. The person who hurt you may be operating within a cultural framework that supports their behavior, while making your pain look like weakness. Think about the messages we hear every day. Don't care what others think. Put yourself first. While those ideas can be empowering, Jung warned they're often twisted into justifications for coldness and emotional neglect. The same culture that says just move on also enables people to avoid facing the harm they've caused. According to Jung, this collective shadow appears in relationship advice too. Phrases like closure is something you give yourself, and you can't control others. Only your response contain truth, but also allow harmful people to escape accountability. They shift the full weight of healing onto the person who was wounded. And here's something even more disturbing. Jung discovered that society often protects its most harmful members by framing accountability as weakness. The person who hurt you benefits from a cultural myth that your need for acknowledgement and repair is immature, when in truth, it's a basic requirement for relational health. One of the most deceptive forms of shadow denial, according to Jung, is what he called spiritual inflation, using psychological or spiritual language to dodge responsibility. He found that people deeply invested in self-growth, spirituality, or psychology often weaponize these very tools to avoid doing the actual work of self-awareness. Have you ever been hurt by someone who later said, "This happened for a reason," or "It was a lesson you needed to learn"? Jung would say, that's not wisdom, that's spiritual bypassing. They're using elevated language to avoid the humbling process of acknowledging they caused harm. Spiritual bypassing allows people to present themselves as evolved or enlightened, while completely ignoring their own shadow. They might cast themselves as your teacher, implying that your suffering is somehow a gift they've given you for your personal development. This is one of the most insidious forms of non-apology, because it feels so conscious, when in truth, it's another way of avoiding real accountability. Jung found that many of these individuals are highly intelligent and articulate, but they use their understanding not to evolve, but to escape. Jung also studied people who seemed fundamentally incapable of empathy or remorse. He found that these individuals often carried deep narcissistic wounds from early childhood, wounds that arrested their emotional development at a stage where other people aren't fully real to them. According to Jung, people with these wounds cannot offer authentic apologies because they don't truly perceive you as a separate being. To them, you're a character in their personal story, someone who exists to fulfill their emotional needs, not a full human with your own inner life. This is why some people can see you suffer and feel nothing. Jung discovered that their capacity for empathy never fully formed. Their early environment taught them that survival meant focusing only on their own needs. So they learned to treat others as objects to manage, not people to relate to. He described this condition as emotional colorblindness. They can intellectually understand that you're in pain just as they might observe that a wall is blue, but they can't feel your experience emotionally. And that absence of empathy makes real apology nearly impossible. You can spot these individuals by their cognitive empathy. They understand how you feel and may even manipulate that knowledge. But they lack effective empathy, the ability to actually feel your pain. Jung believed that without this, healing and connection are almost impossible. He emphasized that real psychological growth requires shadow integration, consciously acknowledging our capacity for both kindness and harm. But Jung also found that some people develop such rigid defenses that integration becomes nearly impossible unless they face major life upheaval or deep therapeutic intervention. People who harm others and never apologize, Jung said, are often trapped in what he called psychological complexes, autonomous pockets of the psyche that function outside conscious control. These complexes shield them from guilt and shame, but they also block real emotional development. And here's one of the hardest truths Jung revealed. People can't change until they develop the ability to hold both sides of themselves, their idealized image and their repressed reality. But most people would rather remain divided than experience the discomfort of self-confrontation. This inner tension, the gap between the perfect image they maintain and the shadow they suppress, means they remain fundamentally incapable of offering a genuine apology or making meaningful behavioral change. Jung found that the people most resistant to transformation are often the ones who appear the most confident, successful, and put together. Their achievements reinforce their psychological defenses, making it even harder for them to confront their hidden wounds. But this doesn't mean people can't change. Carl Jung believed deeply in the human potential for growth and transformation. He simply understood that real change demands a courageous willingness to face the uncomfortable truths about oneself, and that willingness, it can't be forced. It has to come from within. Jung dedicated his life to studying the human psyche, not to justify or excuse harmful behavior, but to help us recognize the unconscious patterns that shape our relationships and emotional lives. If Jung could speak directly to you about the people who hurt you and never apologized, here's what he'd want you to understand. First, their inability to apologize says everything about their psychological development, absolutely nothing about your worth. Jung discovered that people who can't acknowledge their capacity for harm are living in psychological prisons of their own making. Your pain is real, your need for acknowledgement is valid, and their failure to give it reflects their limitations. Yours, according to Jung, your healing doesn't depend on receiving the apology you deserve. Yes, acknowledgement and repair are essential in healthy relationships, but your personal growth, your emotional freedom, comes from understanding these dynamics so deeply that they no longer have the power to control your emotional world. Second, Jung would remind you that you have the power to break these patterns by developing conscious awareness of shadow projection and psychological defenses. You can make radically different choices about who you let into your heart, and how much power you give to people who cannot offer true connection. He discovered that people who internalize these psychological truths develop something he called psychological immunity. They begin to spot toxic patterns quickly, protect their boundaries clearly, and navigate relationships with compassion without losing themselves or becoming hardened. Finally, Jung would ask you to hold a powerful paradox to have compassion for the wounds that cause harmful behavior, while still refusing to tolerate that behavior in your life. Understanding why someone cannot apologize does not mean you have to let them stay close. Compassion is not permission. He once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that is your path now, not changing them. Not begging for closure, but growing into your most authentic self. When you do, you naturally draw in people capable of real, reciprocal connection and repel those who are not. The truth Jung uncovered is both haunting and liberating. People who hurt you without remorse are often locked in psychological patterns that prevent them from seeing you clearly, feeling empathy, or taking responsibility. Their behavior is a mirror of their inner world, not a reflection of your value. But here's what changes everything. When you deeply understand these dynamics, you reclaim your power. You stop personalizing their behavior. You stop hoping they'll change. You stop making their silence your story. And that is the moment you become truly free, not because they finally apologized, but because you no longer need them to. Carl Jung's greatest gift was the revelation that we hold more power over our emotional lives than we've been taught to believe. The people who harmed you may never transform, but your understanding of their inner workings can transform your relationship to pain, power, and love itself. So remember, understanding is not excusing, compassion is not tolerating, and your healing is not dependent on their acknowledgement. This is the truth that sets you free. Thank you so much for joining me in this journey. If today's message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who needs it. You never know whose life you might help transform.